Welcome to the Pre-Vetted Podcast, where we spotlight extraordinary people and remarkable talent reshaping our world. Today, we're joined by Damon Lembi. He's a CEO of Learnit, 3 times bestseller author, and he built a career around helping leaders and teams get better every day. He's also a former Division I baseball player at Arizona State, so he blends the lessons of high-performance sports with modern leadership, especially the learn it all mindset, staying curious, taking bolder risks, and building adaptable teams in a world shaped by AI, burnout, and constant change. Damon is also the host of the Learn It All podcast, where he sits down with leaders, builders, and high performers to unpack what it really takes to grow at work and in life. Damon, welcome to the show.
Federico, it's an honor to be here. Thanks for having me, buddy.
Yes, and before we start with the question, I'm truly honored to have you. Let me start by congratulations for the 200 episodes on your podcast in another two years. That's an amazing achievement. You mentioned that you already hit 250. That's an even amazing achievement.
Yeah, sometimes I think that I just get into something and then I just go way overboard, but I really enjoy doing the podcasting because just like we were talking before we came on air, you get to meet so many great people. And for me, it's almost like getting an MBA, getting to spend an hour or so learning from people.
Yes. I think that the beauty of the podcast is that it's an intimate conversation, but it's also you have access to a broader audience. Yeah. And I can understand that, I'm doing the intermittent fasting diet, and I just set a goal and I keep, I can do it another hour. I can do it another hour when I'm realizing I'm doing 20 hours. So yeah.
Well, you have more discipline than me. I mean, in 2026, maybe that's one of my goals to try the intermittent diet. I could use it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, is this idea of a journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step, right? So, I kind of focus on the next step, right? And that's how I've been able to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really important. If you look at, say, for instance, you're going to go run 5 miles, don't think about having to run the entire 5 miles. Just think about running to the next milestone along the way. Break down these big goals into much smaller milestones is a much more achievable way of doing things.
Right. Yeah. And then you keep pushing forward. You keep pushing forward when you realize you did the achievement, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's start by talking about your career, right? When you realize your career will be about helping people learn and grow.
Yeah, well, I never really thought that I'd be in the situation that I'm in for the last 30 years, which I absolutely love. Very long story short, I'm Damon Lembi, and I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. And for me as a kid, it was all about playing sports, baseball, football, basketball, 49ers fan, Giants. By the time I was a sophomore in high school, I realized that if I was going to play in college or professional, it was baseball. Baseball was my ticket. So I went all in on baseball. Things turned out pretty well. I was a high school All-American. And after my senior year of high school, I got drafted by the Atlanta Braves. And so I had my first big choice. Do I want to go play minor league baseball professionally or go to college? I went the college route, I started at Pepperdine, got hurt there, left. They won the College World Series, which I'm happy for them. And then I ended up at Arizona State. And like my wife likes to say, my glory days, I hit a home run in the College World Series. I was getting ready to be drafted for the 3rd time because I went all in on baseball. I didn't get drafted again. So here I am, 22 years old. My career in baseball is over with, and I didn't really know what to do. And for anybody who had any kind of identity crisis like I did, it was a tough challenge. And so, I could keep going or just stop if you have any questions. But yeah, that's where I was 22 years old, thought I'd be a baseball player, and it ended for me there.
Wow, amazing. Yeah, and I think it's in those particular moments when you have this identity crisis or when you have this extreme situation where you can, sink or swim. And, if you don't have that motivation, it's hard to kind of push forward, right? So I've seen that it's in those situations where you can just, if you keep moving forward, you can do something great as you have done, right?
Yeah, you have to take the first step. And I felt like there's got to be something out there for me. And I think that you got to take the first step, but it also helps when you have good people around you, whether it's mentors or families. And it helped me learn that I was more than just a baseball player. I had a lot of other values, and baseball was just something that I spent most of my life doing. And I also realized, and I'm happy to talk about this, that all of the skills that I learned playing baseball were transferable for the rest of my career. And so for me, I was really fortunate. I came from a family who had a big real estate background, big real estate portfolio, and a bunch of other entrepreneurial type things that my father started. And he was just starting a computer training company called Learnit. And he was doing it to learn how to digitize his portfolio. He took a class somewhere else, thought it was boring. And he said, there's got to be a better way to do it. So he hired a guy who was our CFO at our last savings and loan. And that's where Learnit came from. No 5-year business plan. They just went for it. And I just happened to be getting done with school. And so I started as a receptionist at Learnit. And I did that for a couple of reasons. One, I was too intimidated to go work for the big real estate company because I never had a job before. Baseball was my job. And two, I didn't want to be one of those kids where, their daddy puts them up at the, senior vice president level or something. I wanted to roll up my sleeves and show the people around me that I deserve to be there and start at the ground floor and work my way up.
Right, right. I think that there is a lot of similarities on, when you're raising a kid, when you're having employees, right? That you have to show by example, right? It doesn't matter what you say, it matters what you do, right? So I can see how, showing the rest of the team that you can do every job on throughout the level of the organization. I think that's very insightful for a 22-year-old.
Yeah, I think I found that as you come into an organization, if you're an entrepreneur or whatever it is, say you're moving into a new company, learning as many of the roles as possible is important because then it helps you create empathy. So, for instance, I would help set up the servers in the classrooms and troubleshoot if the PC went down, or get to learn a little bit about how we were building a website in HTML. Not because I was a technical person, I wasn't, but I was curious enough, which I think is really important, but I wanted to understand from my team members' perspective what they were doing, what that was like, so I could help them out. And so I did that. I learned some IT stuff. I taught classes. I went out and made cold calls. And within the first 5 years, I essentially was in every position at Learnit. And so when our CEO wasn't working out and the board was looking to find somebody else, I threw my hat in the ring and I said, look, I've helped out with IT. I've taught classes. I've closed some of our biggest deals. I think I'd be a good candidate because I know the business, really well. And fortunately for me, that worked out and I was able to move into the leadership role of CEO.
Amazing. That reminds me of this. I think it's Discovery. This show where they have the boss hidden within the organization, right?
Yeah.
A secret boss or something like that.
I like that show.
Yeah, it's very very interesting. Yeah. And you've done the same thing, but otherwise, counterwise, right? Yes. I had a similar a journey, but on the technical side. So I started as a software engineer, then I moved to leadership. Of managing teams, mentoring, leading, and then eventually became CEO of my company. And I started doing product management, which is kind of the other side of the engineering, right? On the engineering, we think about the what, how to build it, and then on the product, we think about what we should build based on what the people would need, right? So the more I get into these roles, the more appreciation I get into every specific role for the different reasons, right? And I think that's very interesting journey for me. Yeah.
I think it's great to see both sides of the situation, especially, one side you're really creative and then the other side you're producing something. And if you could mesh those two, because we've all seen somebody who created something and it's like their baby, but then they put it out on the market and nobody wants it. And it's because maybe not getting input beforehand, and not being open to what other people may find most important. So I think that that's really interesting.
Right. So can you tell us a little bit more about, you played Division I baseball, right? How you were talking a little bit about this, how that shaped how you live today?
I found that playing sports, whether it's individual sports or team sports, and you don't have to play all the way through college to get a lot of value out of it. But you and I both have young kids, and I think there's so much you can learn from playing sports. I like to call it the athletic education. And I learned discipline, learning how to collaborate with people, perseverance, having that grit. Because in baseball, especially, if you fail 7 out of 10 times, you're a superstar. So you have to just learn to get up and do things over and over again. I've also found that athletes are great at learning how to receive feedback. For instance, I go up to the bat, I strike out. My hitting coach has a conversation with me. He tells me what I need to do and change. I need to be able to absorb that feedback, and I need to implement it 30 minutes later. And that's all carried over into the business world. I've also been fortunate. I have a book called The Learnit Leader. And I was really fortunate. I played for 3 Hall of Fame baseball coaches, and I learned a lot about what it meant to be a great leader. And I'm sure, like you did as well, I played for some pretty bad coaches, coaches who would take all the credit, pass all the blame, who were inconsistent. And I used all those experiences saying, okay, these are what the great coaches do. I want to replicate some of that. And here are some of the things that I learned exactly not to do and make sure I avoided that, because I remember what it felt like to being on the receiving end of somebody pushing the blame out on me when things didn't go well. So I think sports is a tremendous opportunity to learn from. Of course, you also get that competitive drive. And when it comes to discipline, if we weren't 15 minutes late, if we weren't 15 minutes early, we were late. And you just don't see that all the time in today's business climate. So parents out there, put your kid in sports. Let them have fun.
Yes, it's an interesting dynamic because you have competition, but also if you have a lot of ego, everybody else on your team is going to, is going to let you know that that's not the way. And they're very, especially teenagers, they're very effective to let you know that, right?
Yeah, I think teenagers can be tough on each other. So, I mean,
Yes.
when it comes to sports, sure, it helps to have an ego. I prefer to say inner confidence because there is a lot of failure. But at the end of the day, I don't think it serves you very well to come across as an arrogant person who is a know-it-all.
Right, right. I'm from Argentina, so we always talk about Maradona, right? Although I'm the only Argentinian that doesn't follow football. Yeah, but anyway, and they talk about Maradona because he was this solo hero, right? He would go alone, right? And he would ignore the team, right? So everybody wanted to follow that path, right? And for me, I realized, well, that's not a long-term strategy, right? That doesn't work out, right? Even though he was really good, he had a lot of skills, but again, he's an exception of the rule in that sense, right? And then I moved to Mexico 17 years ago, and then people are saying, oh, Argentinians are so full of ego, right? And then they talk with me and they realize, oh, you're not the stereotype that I was expecting, yeah. So yeah, I mean, what I'm trying to say with ego is that, the team dynamic kind of balance themselves. So you become better on collaboration, you develop discipline, building the relationship with your teammates. And it's interesting that you mentioned about feedback because I haven't thought about it that way. And I think that's a great lesson learned because you're always evolving. There's always something to work towards to, right? That's interesting.
I think that there's always an opportunity to continue to improve, and feedback I found to be the fuel for learning. I mean, how are you going to get better if you're not able to have self-awareness, be open to what people have to say? It goes back to even being curious. How could I do this different? How could I be more productive? And in this day and age, leveraging AI. And I think feedback is critical.
Right. You also, kind of changing topics, but I wanted to talk a little bit about your book. You also published a kids book, right? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So my first book was The Learnit Leader, and it's kind of my story of playing for Hall of Fame baseball coaches, learning from my dad, and also the great team I built that I've been able to be part of, and seeing behind the curtain of how leaders lead, how great leaders lead and learn. And as you and I were talking, I have a 8-year-old and a 4-year-old. And I'm always reading them the stories at night. And I've seen a bunch of authors who are able to convert their book into a kid's book. So I created the Learn It All Leader for Kids. And so I'd say if you're between 5 and 8 years old, really, it's a story told in a baseball game. And it's the Pandas versus the Oaks. And it's basically a story about the coach gets sick. A kid steps in. He's a know-it-all. He thinks he has all the answers. And he doesn't listen and collaborate with the rest of his team. And the story, well, don't want to give away the end, of course, but he learns pretty early on that there's more to life than trying to figure it all out yourself. And it just, I think, tells some pretty cute stories about how to be more curious, how to be more open, not being a bully, collaborating. And I don't get any better sense of pride than when I sneak in the room and my 8-year-old daughter, Lucy, reading it to my 4-year-old son, Wally, and she's sharing with him the examples of what she learned from it. And Wally gives her pushback on it. And they're both in the book, right? So Wally's the relief pitcher and Lucy's the catcher. And she's the catcher who reads all the books, went to the library, and is always learning and asking questions, which as a leader, as a parent, as a coach, asking great questions and really listening is critical.
Wow, that's amazing. I've been thinking about writing a kid's book, and now that I'm hearing your story, I'm more excited about doing it myself.
If I could do it, you could do it.
Right. Yes. I'm also very involved on my son's education, and yeah, we're going through different books. We have a list of books that he's ought to read. So I'm sure add your book as well.
Well, just send me your address and I'll send you a copy of it for your kid.
Okay.
See what he thinks.
Great. Yeah.
10 years old, he might be a little past it, but I still think there's some good underlying lessons for the kids. And I think it's so important as a parent. It's just to, like what you're doing with your kid, reading a bunch of books and having them get curious and learning. It's so much more valuable, I believe, than just shoving a iPad in front of them and having them play video games all the time. Reading is great. I do my best to spend 30 minutes to an hour with the kids every night. My wife's even better at this than I am. And just having them read or just having us read to them. There's so many. It's a great way to spend time.
Yes, I agree. I think that it's also a great opportunity to be a kid again, right? Because you can do goofy things that are socially acceptable, right? Because you're playing with your kid, right? I like to play with my son and bring my inner kid back again, right?
One thing I'm doing with them, which is kind of fun, is I pull up ChatGPT with the voice, and I let my daughter dictate what kind of story she wants, and she'll say, ChatGPT, can you create a story for a 8-year-old girl that second grade reading level, and she'll ask it to do different things about her friends at school or whatever. Then it will create the story, and I'll have her read it back. So she's even more bought into it because she helped develop the story with ChatGPT. And this was a great way for her to practice her reading at a second grade level because ChatGPT wrote it at a second grade level.
Well, that's amazing. I mean, I've done something similar with my son when we were waiting on the car and we didn't have like anything to do with. I didn't want to put him on the phone, and we were talking and we started doing the same thing. And one thing we were curious about, and we started doing it, but we couldn't complete the experiment, is how crazy can the story go, right? Like, and this was my son's idea. So, like we start building a story. We added our dog into the story. We added my son into the story, right? And then we start asking, can you go crazy? Can you go more crazy? And keep guiding it towards that. And we haven't like touched the limit of how crazy that story can go, right? And crazy meaning more of a, for a 10-year-old means more of a, adding more adventure, adding, more chaos into it.
Yeah, and that helps with creativity and problem solving even, I bet, by just thinking outside of the box. I think that's a great exercise and fun thing to do with your kid. I'm going to try that tonight.
Yes, I think that's amazing. It's a very fun exercise that I wouldn't have thought otherwise. Yeah, and the other thing I'm doing with my son is I'm leveraging his competing with me, right? He's trying to compete with me. So I told him, wait, well, I I wrote this book, right? I did the Spanish version of the book called Open the Valve, and it's about creativity. And I said, if you spot any mistake, let me know, because that's a mistake that I made. And that's when, his eyes shine. It's like, I am going to find any mistake that my dad did, right? And he had that competition, into him. And then we start doing the he read it in a single sitting. He read the whole book.
Did he
So
enjoy it?
yes, and he found errors. So he was my fiercest editor, right? yeah. And but for him, his initial motivation was, I'm going to show my dad's mistakes.
I think what's nice about that is that you showed your son you were vulnerable enough to say, look, I made some mistakes in here. Can you find those? And when it comes to leading, again, I think the best leaders are the ones who put their ego aside and realize they don't have all the answers and that they're not perfect. And when you're a leader like that, people want to follow people like that. They want to follow somebody who's authentic, genuine, people that you can relate with, and it goes a long way. And you mentioned this at the very beginning. When it comes to modeling the right behavior, people will get behind and put a lot of trust in their leader if they feel like there's somebody who is open to admitting when they make mistakes or figure that they don't have all the answers.
Right. I like, probably this is too silly, but anyway, I like the leadership style of Captain Picard of Star Trek Next Generation. He's a stoic leader. He's tough with his people, but also, vulnerable as well, right? So, I try to follow his leadership style in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, that's the key, is having that balance, because if you're trying to be too kind and too nice, you're really doing your team a disservice. Because if you're unable to have a difficult conversation with somebody, or you're unable to keep them accountable, then you're preventing them an opportunity from growing and learning and achieving what the team needs to achieve to get to the next level. So it's a balance between that accountability, keeping people on track, and also being kind and even giving people grace when mistakes do happen.
Right. And I think that's one of the things that I appreciate the most about that character, because he does that. He opens up saying, I'm sorry for what you're going through, but this is the expectation that we have, the standards that we have for the organization that you have to follow. So he's tough but gentle, right? If that makes sense.
And what's very important with that for everybody out there who's a leader is being crystal clear in setting the expectations for your team. And what we find all the time at Learnit, people are leaving organizations and they're frustrated, usually with their direct manager, because they feel like they don't have clear ideas or goals and connected with the company. So if you're not crystal clear and communicating at all times with, here's what your team goal is, here's what your organizational goal is, then people are wandering around without clear direction. And it's tough to, I don't know, put in discipline and expect things from people if you're not giving them a clear roadmap on where they need to go.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah. um, so can you tell us a little bit more about the learn it all mindset?
So the learn it all mindset is basically, we'll start with the know it all, which we talked a little bit about. The know it all has a bunch of ego. They have it all figured out. I'm sure you've seen it, whether it's around engineers or software developers who are like, this is the right way to do it. This is the right code. We have to do this. And they're not open to ideas. They have it all figured out. On the flip side of that is a learn it all. A learn it all is somebody, I like to say that table stakes is they're humble. You have to be humble and open. And then I've created a framework, the 4 C's of a learn it all, which is character, curiosity, courage, and confidence. Character, again, you have to have integrity as a leader. Shouldn't even have to say that, but it's important. It also means character is saying something and not overpromising and underproducing. Do what you're going to say what you're going to do. So, and be consistent. Nobody likes having a manager who schedules one-on-ones and then continuously moves them around, cancels them or reschedules them. So you got to have character as a leader. If you don't do well by your customer, don't throw it on them. take some of the accountability, figure out what can we do to make this better. Then there's curiosity. We've talked a lot about curiosity. I think that should be the through line through every organization. How can we be curious? What can we do to do things differently? What if we tried this? And especially now, Federico, when it comes to AI, how can we improve this process leveraging AI? What insights can we learn about our company leveraging AI? So curiosity is huge. When it comes to learning, takes courage to learn. A lot of times people say, well, when you talk about learning, are you saying all you just do is learn all the time? No, because learning without doing is treason. You have to put some of it into action. You have to put it into action. And a lot of times you can't really learn things because people maybe are afraid to get out of their comfort zone. So that's why it takes courage to get out of your comfort zone. And the more you do things, just like you were talking about earlier, it creates confidence. So if you get out of your if you get out of your comfort zone and you take those steps and you try things, over time those muscles build and you have confidence. And that to me is really what a learn it all leader is. Character, curiosity, courage to try things out, and then it builds confidence. And then you could share that confidence with your team.
Amazing. Yeah, I think that it's hard. What was this? The philosopher was saying it's hard to fill a cup with full of water, right? So yeah, I think that it's first being able to say I don't know all, right, and then being able to learn from it, right?
Absolutely. Great book that I read recently was Who Not How, and what that book's about is a lot of times leaders make the mistake that they try to do everything themselves. They want to get everything done themselves and they do the how. Where I had a great guest on my show named Cameron Harold, and he says that you should learn to delegate everything but your genius. What he means by that is stay in your strengths zone and then delegate to other people on your team something that they could do for you. And if you do that, that's how companies scale. That's how teams get better. If you are the type of leader who empower people, put trust in them, it's okay for them to make mistakes and turn those mistakes into learning opportunities and give them growth opportunities as well.
Right, right. My first stage as leader was telling people exactly what to do, but then eventually they would come to me with all the decisions of all the company, right? And it was overwhelming. So I had to raise above that and learn how to do better, how to become a better leader, and being able to delegate with ownership, right? In retrospect, sound makes sense, but at that time I struggled with it, right? Until I was able to learn how to delegate better, how to give more clear expectations on the outcome, and then being able to set, I call it boxes, maybe that's not the right term, but this idea of whatever it's within these limits you can do, right? But I do have to set limits, right? For liability, for whether client asks for a specific thing, right? A specific requirement. We always work within boundaries, but once I set those boundaries, I can give freedom within that boundary, and that gives a sense of relief to the person because now they understand where they need to work on, right? And they have the empowerment to do so, right? And instead of asking me, what do I need to do? They start coming up with more higher level problems, right? Or, in complexity or on risks. So we were able to have more interesting conversations.
What you said there that was really important at the beginning was that people would come to you to make the decisions and you were just becoming the bottleneck because people didn't feel empowered at first to make their own decisions. And they said, okay, we got to go to Federico to do this, which is very common. We see that all the time with new leaders. And what you realize is when you become the bottleneck, everything stalls. And again, there's no growth. But I like what you talked about when it comes to boxes, because what I hear you saying, I didn't refer to it as boxes, but focus really on outcomes and what are the outcomes and the goals. And then you give them clear direction and maybe some boundaries or guidelines and budgets and timelines. And once you agree with that with them, then just let them go out and get it done. Stop micromanaging and just say, hey, look, I'm here for you if you need me. And don't be afraid to reach out, but I empower you and trust you to get this done. And when you do that, people are growing around you. You're making them feel good about themselves. They're feeling connected to the bigger goal. And at the end of the day, you make your life much easier because you're not hammering away trying to get everything done. And you're developing other leaders and allowing yourself to focus on more higher end activities. And I think that that's great. What that also does is you'll start seeing ideas bubbling up all throughout the organization because people are they're taking on these initiatives and they're acting like owners and they have accountability for it. And then they're trying to figure out, hey, how could we do this better? How could we do it differently? And they'll come to you. So I really appreciate that approach that you have.
Yes, I mean, it took me a while to figure that out. And then eventually, because if you don't do that, then as you mentioned, I'm the bottleneck, right? And it's, everything happens if Federico is there. If Federico is not there, then nothing happens, right? Because you have
I'll tell you one thing that will happen is if you go out and you hire great talent, Federico, and then you just say, okay, you have to stay here and you do this, and I'll tell you exactly what you'll do. Those types of people are going to leave. They're going to leave your company because you're not stretching them and giving them an opportunity to grow. Why would you hire and onboard and invest in great people and then not give them the autonomy to get their work done and grow as a human?
Right, right. And then you end up surrounded by yes men, right? And that's, maybe is good for the ego, but bad for the company. Right?
I like how you say that because we work with not necessarily yes men companies because they're typically not the ones who invest in training, but invest in their people. But I have a lot of friends or people that I mentor, and that's the type of organization they work for. Yes men our organization. And there's no innovation there. And if anything, people just show up and they put their head down because they don't want to make mistakes and they're never going to challenge the leader. And because of that, things are very one-sided and people are always looking for confirmation bias and everything. And so I think the yes man culture is the not the right way to go about it at all.
Right, right. And I had the same issue with my company. We do staff augmentation for development. And most of those companies, they do behave like yes men, right? They just follow instructions. And the more explicit the instruction, the better, right? And then they don't deviate because they're afraid, right? But I'm more of I push the envelope and change that to come with innovation, initiative, proposals, but also following the policies of the manager, right? Because we don't know their whys behind one decision, so we cannot go, solo, just making a change or doing something without, the visibility of the manager, right?
But you need to be coachable. And if you're working for a manager and you're not coachable and you're kind of stuck in your ways, you got to learn to be able to let go of control and also trust the process. Now, I'm not saying it's not okay for somebody to question the way something's going. I wouldn't recommend doing it all the time, but if you're curious and you have other ways to do it that improves the process, great. But if you're always giving pushback, I've got an example of somebody that is relatively new, been at Learnit about a year in sales. And when he first came in, he wasn't coachable and he was very stuck in my way. This is how I do it. This is how I do it. Well, it's a different industry and even a different culture that we're working in here. And he was very unsuccessful until his sales leader had a conversation with him and said, hey, look, man, if this doesn't change, you're going to be out of a job pretty soon. So kudos for the manager having that difficult conversation. And what I love about this individual, I actually talk about it in a solo episode, is that he realized that he needed to give up control and stop worrying about having all the answers and trusting the process. And he's absolutely crushed it since. And I even asked him, I said, what turned around for you? And he realized, well, number one, I would be out of a job pretty soon. And number two, that Bob, our CEO, CRO, he's got all this experience and I just needed to be coachable and trust the system. And it's been a game changer ever since.
Amazing. Amazing. That's very interesting. Yeah. There was something else you mentioned that I wanted to talk about. Yes, this is another topic, the imposter syndrome, right? You mentioned that in some of your posts, and I think that's something interesting to share with our audience. Can you expand on what you talk about the imposter syndrome?
Sure. I know we all have imposter syndrome. And if you don't, you're either lying or maybe you're a sociopath. And even the higher you go up in your career as a senior leader, whatever, I mean, there's always that, am I good enough type of thoughts in your head, limiting beliefs, imposter syndrome. The first time I really experienced it was when I stepped onto the college baseball field at Pepperdine. I was always used to being the absolute best, and I was surrounded by everybody who was as good as me, and most were better. And I asked myself, do I even belong here anymore? And that's a human way to feel about things. And you see that a lot of times especially with women who don't want to apply for a job because maybe they don't see that they have all 7 things on the list of what's required for the job and, "Oh, I'm not good enough." Well, for those of you out there who think that, if it's something that you really want, go for it. Try it. Go for that position. And if you get hired, whether it's a new sales position or a management position or I don't know, as a first-time engineer, whatever it is, first and foremost, I got a 4-step process that I kind of framework that I follow, that I go through. Step number 1 is label your fear. Let's say you take on this new role and you're worried it's not going to work out. So what's the worst case scenario? I call it purposeful awfulizing. Federico, think about a year in advance. The worst case scenario is I lose my job. Okay. Can I survive that? Yeah, I can go out, I can get a new job. Is that possible that's going to happen? Possible, but maybe the percentage is very low. So you label your fear. So I could overcome that. Once you know that you could overcome that, then you need to take the leap. Just go in and go all in and do it, right? Go for it. Stop worrying about whether or not you're going to fail or not. And when you do that, when you start working hard, I'm not saying 24/7, but put in the effort, right? Really commit, get out of your comfort zone and do the work, get in the reps. Step number 3 is deliberate practice. For me, when I first got into keynote speaking, I had really struggled with my closing. And so what I would do is I would practice that over and over and over again, and not just in front of a mirror, in front of a group of people who'd give me feedback. And when you get in that deliberate practice and you get better at something, then move on to the next thing, because it's easy to procrastinate and just practice a bunch of different stuff. Work on the hard things that you need to get better at. And step number 4, and I like to say, whether you're stepping into a batter's box in baseball or up on a stage, it's time to learn and let go. So stop worrying about your technique. Stop worrying about what's going on, because you know that you've prepared, right? And you're ready for what happens. And maybe you knock it out of the park, maybe you crush it on stage, or maybe you fall flat on your face. But it's like we talked about, it's a learning opportunity, and sometimes we just got to self validate. And what I mean by that is give yourself a pat on the back and just say, "Hey, you know what? I tried something." Because a lot of people pass up opportunities because they're too afraid. And so I think it's so important, if you want to overcome imposter syndrome, label your fear, take the leap in, deliberate practice, and then learn and let go. And if you try that, at the end of the day, it's going to be a win-win no matter what happens.
Amazing. So I think that the hero without fear is reckless, and the hero that has courage is because it's afraid. So it has to go through a difficult place with fear, right? And even with fear going through.
I think fear is good. Fear is good, Federico, because it shows you that it matters to you. And so then having the courage, like you were saying, to be the hero. I don't really think you're a hero if you don't have any courage anyways, because it's hard to, I mean, you might get lucky, but you're going to have to break through that wall, or of whatever that wall is, to be able to get to the other side.
Right. I mean, that was the issue with Superman, was so powerful, right? They needed to invent kryptonite, because otherwise it's not a hero, right? Can do anything, nothing happens to him, right? What's the point, right?
I love that. I'm going to steal that.
The hero needs a struggle to be a hero, right?
Yeah. I think any movie you watch, within the first 15 minutes, you're going to figure out what the dilemma or the challenge is with the hero and how are they going to overcome it.
Right. Right. Yeah. My wife does that. She tells me the finish of the story. Haven't watched that movie, and she says, "This is going to happen." And I'm like, "Don't do that, please. Don't spoil
Isn't
the
that
movie
the
for me."
worst? Yeah. I mean, you just ruin it for you.
Yes, yes, yes. And she's very smart. She figures it out very quickly. So, yeah. This is amazing. I truly appreciate, Damon, to have you here today. Any final remarks before we wrap it up?
I'd say my final remark is for all you out there. I like to say great leaders aren't born or made, they're always in the making. So no matter where you get, no matter how far you go, the best leaders I've ever had the pleasure to meet or speak with always realize that there's room for growth.
Amazing. Amazing. Damon, thank you very much for those insights, and thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Federico. I had a great time.